some scientists really afraid that AI will replace them. But I don't think AI will replace all scientists, but the scientists who use AI will replace scientists who don't use AI. That's a common understanding now in the industry.
Hello, so Artem, welcome to the NeuralPod. It's great to have you on today.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me today.
So, we was introduced by a mutual friend in the biotech and AI space and someone who spoke very highly of you. Excited to speak to you today. You've got a unique blend in the biotech space. You've been a co-founder. It seems like you've also done a lot in business development to develop your own startup and also been a researcher. So having spoke to a lot of people, it's a really unique blend. And now you're at Nebius leading life sciences. Seems like you're working on some really exciting projects there, which we're going to dive into today, as always. And I thought a great place to start. You've got a background in mathematics, and then now you're at the intersection of genetics and AI, again, which seems really exciting. But let's start at the beginning and what drew you into genetics, because it's a niche field.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, I've studied mathematics, and I really love mathematics since I was very young. And because I was doing pretty good at that, I chose this path to move forward. Always when I was studying math, I was really interested in some real life applications. So at the beginning, like when I was studying in university, I was thinking that some engineering, like closer to mechanics or some business applications, can be relevant to the mathematics background that I have. But when I was graduating, I started to speak with people who do some great research in molecular biology. And at that point of time, I understood that genetics is really connected to mathematics. It started to connect because like 20 years ago, it was more about, let's say, molecules or something very, maybe more abstract things. But with the era of human genome sequenced, when we have the full genomes of people decoded, a lot of big data appeared from the genetics. And that's why it's so interesting to work on it these days. And it sounds niche, but I think it can influence a lot of the lives and our planet in general, because it's interconnected to all the life sciences fields.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you think that there was a defining moment for you that made you realize data, AI, and biology would converge? Because up until recently, it wasn't as in the mainstream as it quite is now.
I think it was not any particular moment. It was a lot of moments when I understand that it's growing rapidly, and I dived deeper in it and still fascinated with the field. As you may know, there is a Moore's law, how fast computers are progressing. Yeah, they're progressing exponentially. And genetics is even faster. It's even quicker. So the cost and the speed of genome sequencing is rapidly improving in the last 15 years.
Yeah, it seems like a really exciting time in the industry because, like you say, it used to be super expensive, but now AI is democratizing a lot of what's happening in the genetic space. And we're going to talk about CRISPR a little later on, which is certainly helping with that and seems like a super exciting product. Before we do that, let's start at the beginning. Do you want to just give people an overview of your career and how you've got to working on these projects today? And we'll dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned, I was studying math, and my first job was Accenture. It's a very big IT consulting company. But then I switched to co-founding companies in the field of genetics, bioinformatics, and medtech. I co-founded several companies. One of them was doing diagnostics for infection diseases. It's point of care device for diagnostics. It was based on, let's say, genetic technologies as well. Another company was a genetic lab that actually did DNA tests. Another one was a software as a service for bioinformatics. And the last one was companies that provided so-called confidential computing for biomedical research. Confidential computing is a very interesting field when you can be confident that the data that is processed on CPUs or GPUs on any processors is stored securely. So it's a very important privacy enhancing technology for this field like healthcare or finance or any other fields when the data should be very secured. And now I'm head of life science and healthcare at Nebius. And it's really fascinating to be at that point because now we can work both with AI and life sciences. It's amazing to be here.
Yeah, the intersection is really unique. And that segues nicely onto the next question. I think you've got truly unique experience of being a researcher, then a commercial leader. It's something that some researchers might struggle with making that jump into the commercial world because they require completely different skill sets. So I guess it might be people out there listening to this that are interested in doing the same, especially with the way some areas of AI are going. What were the biggest surprises and lessons learned in your career to this point, would you say?
I think the biggest lesson is that there is no unique lessons or unique advice for everyone. People are super unique. Like we are like even genetically, one size doesn't fit all. So if you look at different leaders and different successful people, don't just copy them because what works for one person will probably not work for you.
Yeah.
Every person is very unique. So I think that's one of the super important understandings that I had through my career, as well as one of the outcomes actually of the current genetic revolution that is going.
Is there any advice you give to researchers now trying to navigate the commercial world or commercial teams navigating fast changing environments today?
Yeah, it would be super simple. Try to use and understand AI, because some scientists are really afraid that AI will replace them. But I don't think AI will replace all scientists, but the scientists who use AI will replace scientists who don't use AI. That's a common understanding now in the industry. So if you can use some tools, like let's say some scientific copilots, you will be much more effective than other people that don't use it. So even if your work is not exactly connected with computer science, if you're not bioinformatician, but if you're a regular biologist, let's say, you still need to understand a little bit about the concepts of AI, or at least to be a user.
I was having this conversation recently, actually, in terms of, we all thought AI might start replacing engineers, and maybe it has in certain areas, but companies like Google are now realizing they can get more out of one engineer, and they're hiring more engineers because they realize they can do more. So it's having the opposite effect in some areas, which is great to see. Okay, well, thanks for the introduction into your career. Let's jump into the meat of the podcast. How do you see the current state of genetics and AI at the moment in terms of what's happening at a high level across the industry?
Yeah. So my understanding is that we were just in the beginning. We didn't have this, let's say, genetic GPT moment. But there are already some interesting models that exist and some improvements that exist in the field. And for example, like you can imagine like large language model, LLM, that is based on some English or Chinese or whatever alphabet or different words and symbols. But DNA is also like a text, but this alphabet consists of 4 simple letters, A, C, G, T. It's a small molecule that every DNA consists of. And if you have enough of this text, enough of these DNAs, you can also train a large language model. And it's very interesting that there's can be used not only to understand the text better, but to also be a generative AI, just like GPT. And there are some models for it. And I think that's already a good start. I think the next waves will be also some copilots connected with the real physical world. When you have the models that can help you to make some experiments, to understand them, but you can work in your lab or anywhere in the physical world, connecting with this in real time. So I think it will be the next step, like fully automating the laboratories, but together with the people in it.
Nice. And I guess, I'm not an expert in genetics while we're speaking today, but the main challenge for a lot of AI companies now is the compute cost or access to relevant data, etc. What do you see as kind of the biggest challenges the industry is facing right now?
Yeah. You definitely mentioned compute cost and available data. I think for compute cost now it's becoming cheaper. The GPUs are becoming more effective, and there are many more providers nowadays exists. Data, I think, is more relevant problem. There is always a lack of good data for life sciences and genomics in particular. But other things that I think is really important that in the current situation, you need a lot of talent that will work on your problems. And you always compete for that talent and fight for the best talent and give the best salaries, bonuses, etc. It's difficult for tech bio companies to compete with them. So I think even in AI era, the value of the actual talent is becoming even higher. Like you need the brilliant minds to actually do great research. I think it's really
Yeah,
important.
I think that's, we have a mutual friend in Alexei Semenko who we helped relocate from Russia to the UK, who's described by a lot of people quite brilliant, but he's also working on some areas of synthetic data for biotech. And a lot of companies that we help, I guess we moved out of a really quiet time in biotech hiring in the first half of the year, but I can tell you that Q3 has been crazy, and moving into Q4, people are getting quite astronomical pay rises, and it is really a war for talent, and it's certainly areas that we address. Cool. Okay, so in terms of the wider AI ecosystem, how do you see AI as kind of helping solve some of those challenges, specifically to genetics?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for helping Accenture relocate because the company that he co-founded is a very good example of how AI and life sciences can work together. His company is doing quantum chemistry for drug discovery and material science, and like real fascinating science behind it. I really like what they do. In general, if we're talking about AI for life science and healthcare, I think we can divide life science and healthcare actually, because healthcare is when you work with a patient and it's more regulated and there are specific tasks for it. For example, medical imaging or note taking, etc. And I can mention like very interesting company, like customer of Nebius called X8. They're doing medical imaging based on AI. It's really fascinating. And if we talk about life sciences is something that provide insight and inventions that will be later used in actual healthcare and medical implementations. And life sciences can be divided into several parts. Genomics, let's say drug discovery and drug development. I think it's the main part of life sciences. And there are a lot of companies and let's say interesting models in all of these fields, but probably drug discovery field is the most advanced now because it's super expensive. It's really ineffective in a way. I can give one very famous example of AlphaFold. So it is a model that is actually Nobel winning like technology that was made, as far as I know, kind of accidentally in Google. So they had a hackathon in Google, and one of the persons there just had an idea if they can implement AI for the problem of protein folding. The thing is, when you need to understand this 3D structure of a protein, you need to spend several dozens of thousands of dollars. It can take 1 or 2 or 3 years to do only one 3D structure. And if you need a lot of them, and the combinations, possible combinations of protein structures is huge. You just cannot go through them. But if you need like one, you spend a lot of time, you spend a lot of money and find this 3D structure. But with AlphaFold and similar technologies, you can get any sequence of the protein and have its 3D structure just in a seconds, or like even if in minutes, it's still fascinating. Yeah, it's still impossible to imagine like 10 years ago. And that's a very good example, maybe the most famous example right now, how life sciences and drug discovery in particular was improved with artificial intelligence. And I think if we go to genetic field or, for example, clinical trials field, it will also be some fascinating results. And already see some great companies in clinical trials. There's a company called Trial Hub, and they are implementing LLMs, and they gather data from many, many different sources to enable faster and more accurate clinical trials. It's super expensive and difficult for part of the drug development process.
And what for the everyday, I get that, AI makes a researcher's job a lot easier, which in turn makes it a lot easier to develop a product or a vaccine. But are there any recent examples where, AI has been used that you can think of to develop a vaccine that has actually the right trials, clinical trials to be used in the real world?
Yeah, the problem is that even if you have accelerated drug discovery process, you just cannot jump through several years, like 5-10 years of clinical trials. And because it's all happened in recent years, there are several drugs or therapies that are proceeding through the clinical trials, but it just was not enough time for them to come to market. But in 5 years or 10 years, we'll see plenty of them. And I can say a more stronger prediction here that every drug that will go to the market will, in some sense, will be AI enabled. Because even if it will not be fully produced from scratch by AI, at every stage, like of the development, scientists, chemists already use AI to some extent. So any drugs that will go to market will be AI enabled.
Interesting. I think the real change that I've seen over the last years is it used to be the big players in big pharma, like Johnson and Johnson, almost had a monopoly over what was being developed, and now it's amazing to see all these small biotech startups really developing some amazing things. So I think that leads nicely onto CRISPR, which is an LLM-inspired multi-agent system, basically democratizing access to gene editing. I hope I've got that right. Do you want to just introduce people to CRISPR? It seems like there's some really amazing people working on that.
Yeah. So CRISPR GPT is one of the most favorite AI applications for life science and genetics in particular. And I'm super proud and happy that Nebius participated in that one. This project was made in Stanford by Professor Kong Lab and some other collaborators from different companies and organizations. The thing is that there is a CRISPR technology. And CRISPR technology is Nobel-winning technology that allows very accurately and, let's say, not very expensively to edit the genes of people and other species. Gene editing technologies exist for several decades already, but they were not effective and they were expensive. CRISPR technology is something that scientists didn't invent themselves, but they saw it in the nature. They saw that bacteria can fight with the viruses with a very specific type of immunity that was called CRISPR-Cas9 or similar CRISPRs. When you have this CRISPR technology implemented to the medical field, you can very accurately change some letters in your DNA, in your genome. And it allows you to treat different very dangerous disease, like different cancers, as well as very difficult to treat genetic disorders. If you implement CRISPR, you can very effectively change letter by letter or like cut some pieces of genome. But the problem is that our genome is very difficult. It's very complex. If you will change something that can be obvious for you in terms of getting some result, you want to delete some protein that you think can be a case for specific disease. Often it's not the best solution because it is very interconnected. It's complex and you need to all the potential outcomes and how it will influence all your health, your whole body. That's why it's a very tough problem. And you need to keep that in mind when you do different CRISPR as well. Or even if it's understandable right now how to make a new CRISPR chemicals for specific gene editing, it's still a little bit tough engineering problem. You still need to be very accurate in these chemicals that you produce. And often when scientists do them, they lead to some mistakes. There is not any CRISPR system right now that 100% effective all of the time. It usually have some efficiency. And because we're speaking about gene editing, because we're speaking about actually changing the genomes of people, we should be very accurate with it. Here is where CRISPR GPT appears. What Stanford team did, they took a lot of information of how scientists actually create these CRISPR chemicals. And they saw, they feed it into their model and make an agentic product out of it that can help you to do new CRISPR systems much more effectively and much faster. They did several experiments when it was molecular biologists who didn't have any experience particular in gene editing. And they could make a new CRISPR system that was very effective and targeted several genes just in a few days. And it's amazing because before, I think it will take at least several months to person to study this. Even if molecular biologist will understand it in a few months, he or she will still make pretty much mistakes. So imagine that it's a copilot tool that allows you to progress in a very specific bioengineering thing much, much faster. At the end, it means more effective drugs and more effective therapies.
Interesting. And we spoke earlier about how the biotech space has changed. A lot of smaller startups are developing now. And I think I've seen recently a publication in the agentic space developed by just one person, which is extremely rare. And I think that's a sign of things to come. But, I think CRISPR, from what you said there, has got the potential to help a lot of smaller teams. What do you think the main challenge is for researchers using CRISPR right now in smaller teams, and how could this product help them?
You're right. It can help to democratize inventions. Yes. And it can help to democratize scientific inventions. But there is still a problem for smaller companies. You just cannot overcome the need for a good lab. So if you're creating some great molecules or some great CRISPR systems, whatever, on your computer, that's good. But you need to validate it in real life. You still need to have some cells. You still need to have some chemicals, some lab people, and validate it in real life. And that's where bigger companies usually have an advantage, to be honest. Because when you're operating on a scale, when you consume a lot of chemicals, when your lab can be full optimized, you can test much more than the one person somewhere, I don't know, in MIT or in Harvard. Even if you have access to a lab, still big companies can be more effective than you. But still there is a very big place for creativity. And one of the very good options is for someone to make a biotech setup, to validate it to several degree, and then sell it to bigger biotech or to pharma. Big pharmaceutical companies, they're very actively looking for these new ideas. and they're very happy to acquire some groups or some molecules or some technologies at the very early stage. So I think like if you're doing some early stage biotech, one of the easiest and the more effective ways for you to succeed is to sell your molecule or your genetic technique to some bigger company, like pretty early stage. Because otherwise, like when you proceed with clinical trials, if you go to phase 2 or phase 3, you'll just need huge resources to proceed with it. And it's almost impossible for any small biotech to raise such amount of money to do that. So even in AI that we live now, I think it's still the easiest way to proceed. Just experiment, find some interesting product, let's say, sell it to bigger pharma, and they do a new one.
Certainly, it seems like the game has changed and it's all about acquisition these days with startups. I think the wider machine learning and AI community is all about agents this year and multi-agent architecture and reinforcement learning now starting to power a lot of products along with traditional with LLMs as well. Let's talk about the architecture in CRISPR and how it's powering current systems that you're seeing.
Yeah. So, for example, if we talk about CRISPR GPT, it's actual agentic system. Yes. So it's not only one LLM model. It's actually an agent that can help you to do your experiments. And if you don't mind, maybe I can tell that we have a webinar with Professor Kong on how to build agentic AI models for sciences. And on that webinar, it will be like after our recording with you, but depending on when people will listen to that podcast, they probably will see it online already. We'll do some demos there. And I think Professor Kong will be the very good person to actually show how it works in real life to different applications of agentic systems, CRISPR GPT and others as well.
Yeah, I think, depending on when this goes out, they can watch it live or the recording, I guess. So moving on to the future, what do you think CRISPR means for the future of gene editing?
It looks a bit controversial. I think nowadays, and not everybody knows that we already have CRISPR gene edited people that live on the planet. At least 2 people are like 2 babies in this world. Yeah, it was an experiment, not an experiment, let's say. It was a thing that one of the Chinese scientists did a few years ago. He actually gene edited a few embryos, and these embryos became real babies, 2 girls. What he did, he had very good idea that there is a very specific gene that's important for HIV to infect the person. And if you have this protein with one mutation, then HIV just cannot infect you and you will not have AIDS. Like any person with this mutation will not have AIDS even if connected with HIV. And this mutation exists in the world. Around 1% of the population, mostly Europeans, have this mutation. But with CRISPR, you can make this mutation artificially. You can cut the 32 letters of one specific gene, let's say throw it away, and then reconnect this gene. And you have the person that is immune to HIV or AIDS. And the scientists implemented it to 2 embryos, 2 girls were born this way. They're immune to HIV, hopefully. But this experiment was a scandal in the scientists and academic field. And he even went to prison for that.
Yeah, so it crosses so many different lines in terms of, obviously you've got the ethics within genetics, which I imagine most people are adhered to, but then crosses political and religious lines, and everybody's got different opinions, and never more so in the current state of the world. So yeah, let's speak more about this. So what's the current state and thought process in the genetics community about doing this kind of experiment?
I think right now consensus is the following. If you treat in some very severe disease, and it cannot be treated as a way, then you can use gene editing for that. But if you want to enhance the person and there is some other way to do it, then the consensus is let's not do it. But I think it will change. As well as we will progress, one will have much more gene therapies for very severe diseases, we'll go one step further and further. Because I think like having an immunity to very dangerous infection disease, it's not actually treatment, but it's a very good feature that some of the people would want to have. It's like a vaccine, like genetic vaccine, let's say. Right now, people are very cautious about it. But I think like in probably 10 years, that's something that maybe will be done like here and there in the world, depending on the regulation, depending like religion, ethics, whatever, in different societies. But I think that's something that will be, especially if we will understand the potential consequences of different like gene therapies, and AI can help here. If we will have a broader picture of how the genes are interconnected, people will be step by step more open to it.
If someone felt CRISPR would be good for their team, are you happy for them to reach out to you?
Yeah. Like if anyone will see any potential of reaching me regarding like any things that Nebius is doing or our partners is doing, feel free to connect me. I will help as much as I can.
Absolutely. I know, like I said at the start of the podcast, I know we've got a couple of friends in the same space, and I know they spoke highly of you and the help you provided. So yeah, I think would recommend you as well from what I've heard. Cool. Okay, moving on to just a bit of fun in terms of future predictions. I ask similar questions to people who come on. Is there a book or film or paper that's influenced how you think about AI or science in recent years?
I think it's a classical example for anyone who want to understand the future of biotech and how it may look like. The classical example is Gattaca. It's a pretty old film already. I don't know if you watched that one. It's really interesting. Yeah, it's about the future when people can invest their money into creating a better children. And if you don't have enough money, then you just make a simple, regular, natural born kid. But if you have more money, okay, you choose your embryos, you choose the best one, you make gene editing here and there. And society became genetically predispositioned, even much more than in current situation. And it's really interesting how it can work. Because, for example, many people in Silicon Valley and other places around the world, they invest money into having genetically better children already. Without gene editing, you can choose the best embryos with the best, that's so-called polygenic risk score. So if you have a naturally conceived baby, then you just have random result of how your genes can interact with each other. But if you have like few embryos, then you can see the particular combination of the genes. And if you have 10 or 20 of them, and if you sequence the genome of this particular embryo on a very, very early stage, when it's a few cells, then you can put all these genomes into the models that will try to calculate how smart, resistant to some disease, tall, etc. will be your baby in the future. It's a prediction, it's some estimation, but like it's super popular these days, right? Like at least 2 companies that were popular for that particular type of thing. The future that Gattaca movie has predicted. And I think we're very close to that, to be honest. And I don't know how we'll, as a society, will work on that. Interesting.
I love speaking about things like this. And I always wonder, are we following the frameworks that some of these films are providing, or did someone predict the future really well? Because the intersection and crossover seems to be pretty close at times. So, okay, and if you could see one AI-powered revolution in your time, what would it be? What kind of breakthrough do you think could had the biggest impact? And it can be genetics related, by the way, because that's, I would say, very much at the frontier at the moment.
Yeah, I think what I would love to see from AI revolution is that Anthropic, Dario Amodei, is talking about. He's biophysicist by background, and in his essays, he also mentioned how AI can accelerate life science and healthcare. And I really like the vision, even if it's not absolutely correct or accurate. I still love the trend. He mentions and predicts that in the next 5 or 10 years, we'll with AI, we'll have an ability to prevent and treat most of the diseases, and we can double the lifespan of people on the world, around the world. So if AI revolution can help us to live a longer and more healthier life, let's say we can live for 150 years without severe disease and be in good form, yeah, I think that's something that I would love to see, because it's more
Yeah.
happy years with like your friends, with your family, etc. Contributing very small amount as far as I can.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would disagree with you on that as well. I think who wouldn't want to live longer and better for those years? So it's one of the reasons I cover the longevity space. I think it's in its infancy and something I'm super passionate about supporting as well. And in terms of genetics and AI and the intersection, obviously CRISPR is doing some amazing things, but are there any other areas that excite you in the space or companies outside of Anthropic?
Yeah, so like the fields that I really like and like have a background in is genomatization studies and polygenic risk. So it's when you look at the whole genome and trying to understand how it influences particular traits. And it's really important to see right now, not only on the level of DNA, but other molecules like RNA, proteins, etc. It's called multiomics. With AI, we can build the better, I mean, like society or like scientists and different companies will definitely have the option to build the better polygenic scores, to make a better station studies. And I think it's really important because if we'll understand these nuances and we'll have the bigger picture, based on that, we'll go closer to personalized medicine, to really personalized approach to prevent disease and to treat disease. Because right now, even in like the richest countries and successful societies, we often have some basic rules how to treat some disease or how to make checkup, etc. And it often does not include the information about your genome, about whole your biology. If we can do that and offer personalized medical services, it will be an amazing outcome.
Super. And I think that segues nicely onto the next part. And you've kind of semi-answered this question, but yeah, I'm a huge sci-fi fan, and it's one of the reasons I love the biotech and genetic space, because it does kind of intertwine at times. So what's the one sci-fi-esque breakthrough that you think might happen in our lifetime?
It's a good question. I think if we're talking about something that will happen in the field of genetic AI, I think it will be somewhere around cloning, gene editing, and 3D printing or producing some organs. So let's say in some distant future, you can clone yourself, you can make yourself better based on gene editing, and you can easily replace your organs when they are not effective anymore.
Yeah.
You don't like your liver anymore. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like sci-fi, but
Yeah.
we're moving in that direction.
Yeah, I know we had Alexei Strygin on previously, and he was talking about organ sacks, and his real companies developing that technology right now. And I guess $1 million question, Artem, if you could, would you clone yourself?
That's an interesting question. There is so much ethical concerns here. I mean, me particularly, I would be curious to do that. It sounds like something very interesting. Yes.
Yes, I know the company having next on the podcast, they are startup on the West Coast, and they're developing digital clones of people where they're much more personalized. There's so many ethical challenges with that as well, I guess, with deepfakes in the world. But would you have a very accurate digital representation of yourself if you could, out of interest?
I think yes.
Yeah.
Of course, if we're talking about movies,
Yeah.
my first thought about Black Mirror. And
Yeah.
yeah, the easy answer is yes. I would love to have a digital copy of me. But yeah, in like on a bigger scale, on terms of like society, we need to think of it. And
Yeah.
so the right answer is yeah, we should, like, it's a good thing to do to make digital copies, etc. But as usually, it should be somehow regulated and need to have some rules for that.
Yeah, I think as a solo founder, I'll go on record and say I would love one because it would help me out tremendously. So thank you so much for coming on today, Artem, and sharing your knowledge and being so open. I've really enjoyed it. I think this has been one of my favorite podcasts I've done. So thank you so much for that. In closing, before we wrap up, is there anything you'd like to say?
I would love to thank you, Chris, for inviting me to the podcast. And yeah, I would like to thank you for paying attention to the field of longevity and life sciences, and to everyone who watched the podcast. I think it's great that you watch it, of how AI can help all of us to live longer. It's a really fascinating field. It will change a lot, and stay tuned for that.
Yeah, nice. Thank you so much. I'm really glad I can support you with this. And to wrap up, I'll put some links to get in touch with you if there's any small teams or researchers or startups are interested in how CRISPR or Nebius, or you can support them. I think you're doing some really great things there in supporting the small community. I'll include links to the webinar as well, where if it goes out before, where you can watch, or the recording after. I'll include some links to the team as well. I think when you're choosing, there's so many products out there at the moment. When you're choosing the right product for you, knowing that there's a good team behind the product is really important. So I'll include some links to the teams. And I think that Nebius are doing your discovery awards and your startup program for next year as well. So I'll include links to that for anyone who needs support as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chris.